Hello and welcome everybody. We are stoked to have you all. I'll give you a minute while we wait for everyone to get situated and dialed in. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and launch our first poll. We're curious to see what's bringing you to today's webinar. Is it educational? Are you in the beginning stages of your third-party risk management program? Are you a current prevalent customer? Are you just bored and you love hearing the sound of Scott and Tom's voices? If so, I can't blame you, but either way, let me know. I can't forget about some introductions. My name is Ashley and I work in business development here at Prevalent, and we are joined with a very special guest, Director of TPRM Services at Echelon Risk Insight, Tom Garrubba. Hey, Tom.
Hello, Ashley. How are you?
Doing well. And we can't forget about Scott Lang, our very own VP of Product Marketing. Hey, Scott.
Hey, Ashley.
And just a quick reminder, this webinar is being recorded and we will be sending out the recording along with the presentation slides shortly after the webinar. You're all currently muted, but we do encourage participation. So please put any questions in our Q&A box so we can go over them at the end. Today, Tom is going to be discussing the top 5 items that a newbie needs to know when building out a TPRM program. So Tom, I'll toss the keys over to you and let you drive.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is obviously something that's right up my alley, something I'm very, very passionate about. And I think this is a great way for newbies here to talk about what challenges are you going to encounter when you come up for the very first time and you've been tapped on the shoulder by somebody within your organization, and hence the term at the bottom. Congratulations. You have been the person designated to roll out a brand new third-party risk management program. And when that happens, you really start thinking to yourself, holy cow, what am I getting myself into? First off, I want to say congratulations. This is one of the hottest fields within the organization. You can't just sit there and say cyber risk anymore, because third-party risk looks at a ton of different risks. Okay? Third-party risk management programs are really being tapped to do far more than just cyber and doing assessments. So some of the things to consider when you're looking to get your program off and running is you got to start thinking both tactically, but also you got to start looking at things strategically. So I'm going to take you through 5 items that you really need to know when you're going to be rolling out that program. So little shameless plug. Ashley already gave you a little bit of an idea as to who I am, what I do, and all that fun stuff that goes with it. I've been around the block for something like that, in some spaces going from internal audit to external audit. So I've been on the dark side of the force. I've been in security. I've been in privacy, doing operation audits, IT audits, Sarbanes-Oxley, all that fun stuff. But I really started to make my bones as a professional with respect to third-party risk. I was actually tasked to implement and manage a third-party risk program for, at the time, a Fortune 9 healthcare organization, I should say, another Fortune 3 or 4. So probably pretty much just do a quick LinkedIn and you can see who I'm referring to here. Certifications are great too, and one of the things that I really want to focus on is education. Constant education is going to help you in this field, not just necessarily from a certification perspective, but also knowing and understanding the risk. So we're going to get a little bit more into that as we move along. But why are third-party risk management programs so important? And the main reason why they're important is the latest Verizon study. And this is a conservative number that I have up on my screen, that 62% of system compromises came from the supply chain. I've seen other reports from whether it's Ponemon or whether it's Deloitte, or whether they're studies from over in the European Union, that actually have this number between 75 to 85%. So it really depends, because in a lot of cases too, breaches don't have to be publicized. If you're dealing from the privacy aspect, yes, they do, because you're talking about actual data subject or individual data. But if something happens from a security perspective, depending on the incident, doesn't have to go and be reported to data protection authorities or the ICO in the UK or here to authorities in the US. The thing I want you to understand too is many organizations fail to have a foundation when they're getting their third-party risk management programs up. It's important to have those foundations to build on, to mature your programs. Newbies also don't understand fully all of the linkages, all of the relationships, and the power those linkages bring to your organization. You're not operating in a silo. Even if your third-party risk management program resides in the first line of defense, meaning in the actual business unit, you're dependent on a lot of linkages. We're going to get into that. And the other thing too is newbies have a tendency to struggle when they have to state their case on what they're doing with auditors, with regulators, even executive management, or if you have been tasked to do some type of presentation to the board of directors. So you want to make sure that you're able to explain those foundational components and the value that you're bringing to the organization. I've often said my job is not to be Dr. No. My job is not to tell the business unit what they can't do. My job is to enable the business to do what they do best, making money and bringing money into the organization. However, we have to make sure that the organization does it in small steps, in digestible steps, and they're able to understand it through the risk lens of what they're getting themselves into from a third-party risk perspective. So first thing, got to have executive buy-in, okay? And this is before we get into one. This is almost kind of like a little prequel of what you need to do before you get into the 5 components here. So who's going to own the program? Who's going to oversee it? Who's going to be reviewing your program? I can tell you right now, sooner or later, you're going to have a separate set of eyes, whether it's internal audit, whether it's your external auditors. If you're in the regulated space, trust me when I tell you this, whether you're financial services, whether you're in the healthcare space, or whether you're actually classified as importance with respect to infrastructure to the United States, somebody's going to come in and look at your program. They want to know what you're doing. Legal counsels may be asking you things. You might even be assessed yourself by your clients and your other customers. So you want to make sure you're able to sell your story and be able to present to them what you do and how you do it. So let's get into the meat and potatoes. The first thing you do, study this theorem. It's just the most math you're going to see today. Okay. And it's not even math. This is something that I presented and I got published back in 2013 in the risk.net series, which is a book series on operational risks based in the UK. And they asked me to author the chapter on third-party risk. And so this was something that I came up with because somebody once asked me, Tom, is there something you could help me explain to my management how I should run my program? And this is something that I came up with. So let's go through this real quickly. That big P is your process. Whether it's a third-party risk management program, that's actually your program, not your process. I apologize. But that big one is your program. It starts with your program, whether it's a third-party risk management program, whether it's an asset management program, whatever it is, you start with having an understanding of what the components are going to be. So that first one there that you see is your policy. It is the most important thing you're going to have in establishing what your program is going to be doing for the organization. But if you take a look and go back to your 5th grade algebra, it's not where you start. Most organizations fail at writing a policy, but they don't have the procedures and practices to back it up. So what you should do is you're getting your third-party risk management program, start devising a plan, start coming up with a playbook. Your playbook becomes your operating processes. That's your P2, which are your procedures, how you're going to do things, your standards for what you're going to do from documentation, how you're going to do assessments, how you're going to communicate with management, and even other corporate standards that you may have to adhere. Maybe it's connectivity standard when you're assessing vendors. Maybe you're not, organizations can't VPN into your network. Everything has to be hard B2B connectivity. Okay. And then you have P3, which are your practices. Your practices are your daily things that you do amongst your team, or these are things that are known to you and to other people that contribute and participate in your program, but they don't need to be documented. And I say that because I've seen some organizations that have procedures this big, but it really can only be that big because I don't need to see all of the, when I get this, I email so-and-so, then I pick up the phone and I call so-and-so. You don't need to do that. Trust me, as an ex-auditor, if you can explain to me and I can understand it and I can digest it and I can document it, I'm fine with it. So as long as you're able to share with your staff, with your management, and understand what those practices are, you're going to be fine. So when you start with your procedures and standards and you start to devise, as you can see down below, your TPRM operating process, then you develop your policy. Your policy now is able to support what you have in your P2 and P3 inside your parentheses. Far too many organizations start with the policy, and as I mentioned, they can't support P2 and P3. That's where they get whacked from audit or worse, from a regulator. If you're in the financial services sector, you're going to get what's called an MRA, matter requiring attention, and that goes right up to the board of directors. Okay, so start with P2 and P3, then focus on your policy. Your policy should be no more than 2. However, it's going to document, you're going to see this on the next slide, number 2. It's going to document things such as your relationships, your linkages, and other things that you have tied in your program. So as we talk here about identifying those, it's really important to make sure that you have documented when you pull in these strategic organizations and what their value is to your program. When do you reach out to IT? When do you reach out to information security? When do you have to reach out to privacy? You don't have to notify privacy of everything that goes on, but obviously when you're in touch with personally identifiable information, you want to make sure you're in alignment with what privacy standards there are. Sourcing and procurement. A lot of organizations will bypass sourcing and procurement. And the reason why I say that is because in many organizations, they can't deal with smaller ancillary vendors. It's like you only, and you'll see this in a lot of financial policies. Well, they'll say, unless you're going to capitalize the expense or it's over $50,000, then it has to come in sourcing and procurement. Anything under that, you might have a director who's responsible for up to a certain dollar value, a VP that's responsible up to a certain dollar value. Anything over that then has to go into the books through sourcing. Okay, so it's important to understand when you have to get them involved. Human resources, particularly when organizations are bringing on temp help or they're bringing on consultants, organizations. Have they been vetted? What do we need to see from organizations that are going to be coming in? What are the HR guidelines? Do we have to practice things like DEI? Are there ESG components that we have to focus on? So that's where you're going to make sure you have that understanding and the linkages coming into HR. Business continuity. When do we reach out to our BCP folks? Is this a critical vendor? Is this something that we need to be in alignment and make sure we have an understanding of the criticality of that vendor to the organization? What about facilities management? If somebody's coming into our organization, they're going to get card access. Most of that is done through facilities management. Okay. If you're bringing in, think of even the custodial staff. How does facilities management vet them? Does HR vet them? Make sure that we trust them coming in. Do they have any criminal records, things like that? Pulling in legal. When do you pull in legal? Usually in the contract phase. Is there any addendums that have to be added to it? How do we go through the redaction? What happens if we see red lines? Okay. If we find issues, do we bring that up to legal? Do we bring it up to the business unit? How do we tie that in? Same with compliance. We know what the guide rails are with respect to our third-party risk management practices, as well as the business units. They're also responsible for following their guidance with respect to being in compliance. And then finally, audit. When do you reach out to audit? This is often the least played card in third-party risk, but it's one of the most important, and I'll explain why. Believe it or not, auditors really are your friend. If you can work with auditors and bounce ideas off them, they'll help provide that guidance. And the critical thing about audit is they really can be the ace up your sleeve. So if you have a regulator come in, you have an external auditor come in, or if you have a client that comes on site or asks to see additional things, you can actually go to audit. And if audit understands these processes, or even in the future, if they happen to take a look and audit your program, they're able to support your responses and your efforts and be by your side, be in the office with you as you're going through these types of on-site engagements with an external auditor, with a regulator. but you can't really use audit if they're not aware of what you do. So it's better to be proactive and share this information and get their advice than to be on the receiving end and waiting for audit to come in and go, you know, hi, I'm from audit and I'm here to assess you. It's great to make sure that you have that lined up in advance. Okay. Next, you want to identify tools that are going to assist your program. So when we're talking about tools, how are you going to do assessments? What standards are you going to use? Are you going to use things like the standardized information gathering questionnaire from shared assessments? What version are you going to use? Not all scopes of work are the same. You're going to need to scope this out. There are tools that can help you do that. That's where you rely on third-party risk management platforms, such as Prevalent. Prevalent is a great tool for this. Thank you as a sponsor, Prevalent. And that's the importance of using tools to help you as well. These tools help you from the administrative side. They can help from a repository perspective. They can do things also with respect to helping you monitor your vendors, not just your third parties, but even your downstream vendors. So it's very important that you're able to use tools to help you in your efforts of understanding the third-party risk within your program. You can also purchase additional tools. Sometimes they're tied into these third-party risk management platforms, or you may have to go outside and purchase these yourself if there are certain things that are needed within the organization, certain needs to monitor certain types of risk, such as ESG. Are you looking for things from a geolocational, geopolitical perspective? Are you looking at things from a governance perspective with respect to social governance, making sure that a vendor that happens to be maybe somewhere in Africa or somewhere in Asia, that they're not using things like child labor or slave labor? You could be looking at things from a financial perspective. Nobody wants to engage with a vendor and then find out 6 months later, holy cow, did anybody see their bond status? It just went to junk. And they got junk status. Now I'm seeing in the news that they're a takeover candidate for an organization. Oh my gosh, that organization happens to be our competitor. What happens if that organization purchases one of our vendors? What happens if that vendor who's being a target for being acquired is one of our critical or strategic vendors? Now what do? We got a 4-year contract with them. So these are the things you need to do. These are the things that are going to help you get your handle on risk and be able to present this to the business unit and to the second line and the upper echelons within your organization. And of course, from a legal perspective as well. Have your third parties, are they engaged in a class action lawsuit? How are they looking on social media? Is there any ancillary lawsuits against? These are things that you're going to be working. If you don't do this yourself, guess what? There's other organizations within your company that may be doing this, such as, at least from a legal or financial perspective, could be your legal department or could even be sourcing and procurement. So that is what I want you to understand, the importance of the tools and the importance of the linkages, having this tied into your organization. Okay. And as I get back to assessment tools as well, you can use multiple tools. I'm not just sitting there saying you have to use this. It may be dependent on what the service is being provided. So if you're doing something in the cloud, for instance, you may want to use the cake. That's how they pronounce it. The cake is the questionnaire for the cloud environment. You may have a vendor that sits there and goes, we follow NIST. We follow ISO. We are in alignment with CISA. Okay. Oh, if you're giving credit card information to somebody, are they in alignment with PCI? So you want to make sure that the tools that you're going to use for that assessment have that flexibility and have that built in where you can utilize those assessment tools for PCI compliance, for alignment to the NIST standards, and alignment to ISO guidance on and okay. Next, design your program based on your current and existing abilities. Can't tell you how many times I've seen TPRM leaders start to craft their program and they're looking at where do they want to be a year from now? Where do they want to be 3 years from now, 5 years from now? No, you got to start with what you have today. You can't necessarily assume that you're going to be at a certain maturity level a year from now. What are your existing staffing needs based on the inventory that you have? Are you able to do it? What is your budget? What is your budget for technology? What is your budget for staffing? What is your budget for bringing in external assessment firms to help you get through the backlog that you have in your vendors to be assessed? How many assessments do you have on your? Are you talking 10? Are you talking 100? Are you talking 1,000? What's the criticality of those assessments? Were you able to prioritize and order those assessments? Which ones you want to target first? Hopefully you're following the Pareto principle and targeting where the 80% of the risk is. It might only be 3 or 4 vendors, while all of your other vendors might pose into the 20%. You want to make sure you're taking a risk-based approach as you start going into that part of doing your risk analysis and making sure you're going to be scoping these appropriately, making sure you have the appropriate resources. The other thing here is you need to develop a maturity strategy. This is something that a lot of organizations fail to do. Why? Because they're too reactionary. They don't take steps to be proactive and take a holistic look at their program and say, how are we doing? Are we mature? Where do we fit with respect to our industry in terms of maturity? We're in financial services. Where are we? If we're in healthcare, where are we? Retail, manufacturing, on and on and on. So it's very important that you're able to gauge that. Every year, Shared Assessments publishes the vendor risk management maturity report that goes out. It's an annual report. They did stop for the 2 years during COVID, I have to admit, but the new report's coming out in April. I highly recommend you get a copy of it. And it will be a free download from Shared Assessments. Perhaps Prevalent will even have a link to take you there. But these are things to consider, is looking at that report and saying, what industry are we in? Where should our maturity be? And the maturity that you take through that is based on 8 domains, talking about governance, talking about peace, talking about contracts, talking about reporting to the board and C-level, on and on and on. And it's very important that you really take a look at yourself and you're able to start saying, where truthfully are we in a scale of 1 to 5? 0 if it's non-existent, and 1 is we're kind of ad hoc, we're planning this stuff out, all the way to 5, which is, hey, we're a well-oiled humming machine and we do this. So it's also very important that you take the time back to being proactive, taking time with you and your team and saying, what were the challenges that we had this year? What were the successes that we had? Great to say, yeah, we did this. This is great. What were our challenges? Now, once you understand those challenges, you have the opportunity to go back and update P2s and your P3s, procedures and standards, and your practices. Once you're able to make those tweaks, you're much better able to support. Okay? Design your program to be free. I've seen a lot of programs that are actually operating outside of their procedures, outside of their policy. From an audit perspective, you will put yourself at risk. Even if you're doing the right thing, you still put yourself at risk because you're outside of this. You might even have an auditor say, why are you doing this? This should be done by that group. Why are you putting yourself at risk that if something fails, you're going to be on the hook for it because you're doing it? This is something you need to sit down and you need to work with, say, procurement or sourcing, or you need to work with a privacy group, or you should have let legal know of these challenges, or you should have been back to the business unit and said, no, this is all you. This isn't us. So it's important that when you see those and you come upon those challenges that we mentioned in number 4, making those adjustments, you've got to be fluid. For those of you who have served our country, God bless you. Thank you for your service, but I'm sure you've heard this term. You need to be fluid because being flexible is too rigid. You need to be able to make changes on a dime in today's environment because risks are constantly changing. The threats are constantly changing. Cyber threats, geopolitical threats, environmental threats, they're constantly changing. So you need to be able to make those fluid adjustments to your program. As you're making those fluid adjustments, make sure you build some tolerances in for staffing, for resources, for training, for budgeting. Make sure that you're able to also, this is something that I did on one of my TPRM tidbits, which are released every LinkedIn, something that you could take a look at and go, hey, wait a minute, I got all of these assessments coming due in May, June, July, and August. I got a couple of people on vacation. How are we going to tackle this? They're scheduled to be assessed. What are we going to do? Better yet, don't you think your vendors are going to be on vacation too? Don't you think they're not going to be available? So you might want to have to go out there and start, I hate saying flatten the curve. We've heard that for 2 years. But taking that curve and start flattening it. We call it load limit. Maybe you could take some of those assessments that were scheduled in June and July and push them into April and May. Maybe you could take some of those that were due in June and July and August and start pushing them a little bit out more into the August and September and October time. Okay. These are the things you got to start preparing yourself for in terms of fluidity and managing your program. That's going to help you load level, particularly on your reassessment schedules. This is something you might not see this year, but trust me, you're going to see this in your reassessments. And when we're also talking about being fluid is risk scores are going to change. You might have a vendor this year that might have been classified as a risky vendor. Maybe they were getting a million records of protected health information, sensitive PII, or even PCI. Well, next year, you know what? The vendor is going to be rolling off this project, and now their scope is going to be something a little bit more where the data is not as sensitive. Or the organization might be done, and then we might be pulling them back in later for something that's more of a flat line, easier scope of work, maybe something dealing more with company confidential. So your assessment needs are going to change based on that scope of work. So you want to make sure you're fluid and being able to make those adjustments as you see. So, wow, I can't believe I went through all that so quickly. But in summary, apply the Garrubba Mortensen theorem out there. Use the Google if you need to see it again. And obviously, I'm sure this deck will be provided later on, along with a recording of this. But remember, when you're developing your program, or you got to revisit your program, focus on the inside parentheses. Focus on your P2s and your P3s. Focus on your processes. You can always refine those. You don't need to have a C-level executive to sign up on your processes. You own the program. You take control of it. You sign off on those. You have the latitude to make those adjustments. So put yourself in a position to succeed. Same with your practices. As you make those adjustments, if you need to make a change to the policy, that's when you have to explain that upstairs to the C-level that you report into and have their ultimate sign-off. In the 5 years I ran my program, when I was at that Fortune 9 healthcare company, I changed my policy one time. That was it. That was it, because of some changes that we made from a risk-based perspective. Okay. Continue to identify and build relationships. The running gag that my team had with me when I would go to our headquarters up in Rhode Island, or I'd have to go see our operations centers out in Arizona, my team would also say, Tom comes out here and he never sees us. Well, be happy. We're going out to dinner. I don't need to see them. I can pick up a phone and call them. You know, I can Skype them, or whatever, method of communication I can use. I'm going out there to talk to the business units. I'm looking out to see what projects they have coming up. Because this is March right now. If I happen to go talk to a business unit and he says, Tom, we got these 6 critical projects coming up. One's coming up in June, one's coming up in July. I got 3 in August. How am I going to spread this out? Is there any way that maybe we can move some of these up forward? Would the project management office be aware of that? Would they be okay with maybe moving something up so we can make sure we have coverage during the assessment phase? Every time I go to headquarters, I always meet with our legal counsel. Hey, is there anything going on in the space that I need to worry about in the industry, with healthcare, anything else that we need to be able to take back? So it's important that you have those relationships. Build on it, because it's going to be a lifeblood for you when indeed you do need to reach out to them. Continue to identify tools to assist your program. Okay, it's only going to make your life easier. When you buy a tool, make sure, number one, you have a need for it. I've often said a chainsaw is great, but what good is having a chainsaw and buying one if you live in an apartment building? If you have land and you buy a chainsaw because you want to cut down a tree, how to cut down a tree? You're going to run the risk of cutting off your leg if you don't know what you're doing. Maybe you need to bring people in that know how to do that. Okay. So making sure that you identify tools to assist your program. And those tools, I'll also consider that as staffing. Okay. Designing your program based on your current and existing abilities. Where are we today? What do I need to do to succeed today within my quarter? Where do I want to be 6 months from now? Then start being proactive and looking downstream from a strategic perspective. Focus on the tactical, but also have your eye of looking where you want to be. Don't always think you got to be things strategically. The tactical, you're going to miss your target dates. And again, design your program. You're going to make changes. I've often said Peyton Manning is one of the patron saints of third-party risk management. Why? Because Peyton Manning, if you used to go back and watch him, when he gets to the line of scrimmage and he's looking across and he doesn't like something, he goes, Omaha. Omaha means I'm changing the play. So the original play that you had, you're making a change because you didn't like the way something looked or you saw something different. So you want to put yourself in a position to succeed. You're going to be calling Omaha a lot, but when you call Omaha, keep a log of it. Understand how those changes were made. How successful were those changes that you called? The ones that were challenges or might have caused you some heartache. I never like to say fail because we learn from fail. But those changes, then that helps you to hone in on your procedures and your practices. That strengthens your program. Okay. A couple of final thoughts here, and then I'm going to turn it over to Scott Lang. All third-party risk leaders, especially in regulated, remember to review and work with your compliance and audit from your organization's perspective of third-party risk maturity, looking at your procedure standards and your policy. Make sure you have an understanding and you document the assessments, what needs to be done. Your standards, connectivity, as I mentioned, all of that fun stuff. And lastly, ensure that your updates to your programs can support the existing policy. And if not, sure that your policy is updated. Okay, so with that, if you want to reach out to me and contact me, this is the best way to do it. Send me a ping or drop me a line. If you don't get me, because, with all the fun spam we get on these things nowadays, leave me a voice message. I'll be more than happy to set up some time with you. And this is one of the things I do as a trainer for the CTPRP and the CTPRA as well, as I'm here for you. I'm here to help and put things, help to direct you in the right direction, I guess I can say. So with that, thank you so much, folks. I'm going to turn this over to Scott Lang now, who's going to share with you a little bit more on what Prevalent can do and wonderful tools and things that they have. So, Scott,
awesome.
Tossing you the keys.
Appreciate it, Tom. Thanks so much. Quick check. Can you see my screen okay?
Yep, can see your screen fine. You're good.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. All right, folks, thanks so much for sticking around toward the end of the webinar here. I just want to go through a little bit of what Prevalent can do to help you get across the finish line in taking some of these, 5 lessons learned from a newbie, mistakes to avoid, whatever, and, implement a solution that can help you really change the face of how you manage third-party risk in your enterprise. So I just want to go through a few best practices, what, our typical approach is to addressing those challenges. And then at that point, I'll hand it back over to Tom or to Ashley rather, and we'll be able to answer some questions. Just a few minutes here on Prevalent. Look, when we talk to our customers, regardless of where they are in their maturity life cycle, chances are they're going to tell us they want to achieve any one of 3 things. Number one is that they want to get the data they need to make good decisions, whether that's a decision on onboarding a vendor based on their risk profile, or selecting a vendor rather, getting some visibility into the risk they present at onboarding, inherent risk, if you will, and then getting good data throughout the life cycle of that relationship to say, okay, they're meeting their risk thresholds, their KPIs, their KRIs, their SLAs, and more, so that we can make informed decisions when it comes time to to renew the contract. All these things have to do with data and getting good data to make good decisions. Challenge number one. Challenge number two, or goal number two rather, is to be much more efficient in how you assess a third party, how you manage them through the relationship lifecycle, and knock down the different silos that exist in between the departments that manage an element or two here or there of that relationship. For example, the procurement team might be the one who is tasked with managing the relationship with the third-party vendor or supplier. Perhaps they're running point on getting the contract signed, getting good financial terms in place, accordance with a business, and then execute on the contract and kind of move forward with the development of SLAs, baking the right provisions into the contract before they kind of pitch it over to security to perform a much deeper due diligence assessment. I just named like 4 different departments involved in the equation there, and they're all going to have a different interest, a different need for managing risk, understanding risk, and mitigating risk, depending on where they are or where they sit in that level of relationship. And if you're using a bunch of different tools, overlapping tools, reporting, whatever, spreadsheets, that's not helpful. And then third, customers tell us they want to evolve and scale their programs over time. Excuse me. And by that I mean, to Tom's point about being agile and flexible, you got to be ready to adjust to the business if you make an acquisition and all of a sudden you're bringing on another company's third parties that you have to evaluate, score, and then determine the risk profile that is presented to the joint business. You have to be able to accommodate growing and changing needs for the number of third parties that you have to assess over time, regardless of whether it's an acquisition or whether it's just through the natural course of the business. All right, getting good data, being much more efficient by knocking down silos, and then evolving the program and scaling it over time to kind of be ready for what's next rather. And we see 3 things that really get in the way of accomplishing those objectives. Number one is spreadsheets. So we do an annual study every year of the third-party risk management industry, if you will, an industry study. And in the last 3 years, I am disappointed to tell you that the number of companies that use spreadsheets to assess their third parties has gone up, not down. Now, the good news is that probably means more companies are going about assessing their third parties in a more disciplined, rigorous, or governed fashion, but using the wrong tools to do it. That number's gone from 42 to 45 to 48%, in fact, in the last couple of years. Second big challenge is outdated information. Remember on the last slide, we talked about the need to make good risk-based decisions. Well, chances are around 50% of companies tell us that they don't really have any real-time intelligence into the vendor risk. It's a one and done process. You perform your assessment the time you do your sourcing and selection and an onboarding decision, and then a year goes by or a contract term goes by, whatever it is, and you do a little bit of reassessment with not a whole lot of activity happening in between. Understandably, you got to keep on top of the contract, but almost half companies are telling us they don't really have any real-time view into emerging risks that can impact that relationship. Could be a data breach, could be a financial failure, could be a supply chain disruption of some sort. You don't want to be on the receiving end of that one. And then third, I mentioned multiple siloed teams. Well, why is that the case? Well, again, in some data that we've collected says that about 50% of companies, the IT and information security team or information security team owns third-party risk management, owns the function. But in the rest of the 50% of companies, it's spread between procurement, risk management, vendor management, legal compliance, a couple of other teams like that. So the point of me mentioning that is, there's not a ton of consistency in enterprises as to who owns the relationship, who owns the function, and what the ratio is from there, who's responsible, accountable, and more, right? So it's a complex process to solve. It can't be done manually. It can't be done with outdated information, and it can't be done without bringing, teams together to do it efficiently. So our approach to solving the problem is to be very prescriptive at every stage of that third-party vendor or supplier's life cycle. That's our approach, to solving the issue. And we see distinct risks at each one of these 7 stages of the relationship. And these challenges, which you can kind of see around that little sunrise graphic there, each is distinct at one of those stages, and each has a particular, business impact, and then ultimately, a capability or a solution that can help resolve that challenge. So sourcing and selecting vendors, big challenge there is, you don't have a whole lot of risk visibility or insight into a vendor that you're thinking about bringing on, using some manual processes. When you get to the intake and onboarding phase, once you've made your sourcing and selection decision, you got a bunch of different teams, each with their hand in the pie here, some different processes for onboarding. Legal does their thing, IT does their thing, procurement does its thing, more different tools to get that snapshot of risks. Third, as you're scoring those inherent risks, is it a manual process? Are you sending out a spreadsheet internally to have people fill it out and answer a few basic questions? If so, how are you scoring that? How are you getting good data out of it? How are you making good conclusions from it? And then up at the top of the arc there, the assessment and remediation phase of the relationship. We mentioned before, spreadsheets, manual processes tend to be the bane of everybody's existence. And that kind of, morphs into the next phase as well, where we get into the monitoring and validation phase of the relationship over time. Maybe you're using disjointed tools, you're using a security scoring tool, you're using some business feeds, you're using a D&B, you're using a Refinitiv, or some different tools that give you little pieces, parts of the risk profile, or the different risks that your third party is exposed to. But there's nothing really bringing it together to give you one picture, one story, so you can act on it accordingly. And then measuring an SLAs and performance is another phase of the equation. Again, you got siloed teams, manual tracking, makes it tough to establish and maintain those SLAs. And then finally, and not surprisingly, the stage of the relationship that everybody seems to forget about is offboarding and termination. And an awful lot can happen if you don't offboard a vendor appropriately. There have been a couple of examples of companies being fined because former vendors of theirs didn't adequately destroy their data that was on their systems, and that's going to come back on that particular vendor. And manual processes are really the problem there. And this problem's across the enterprise: procurement, security, data privacy, legal, compliance. Our approach is to add automation and intelligence to RFX processes, create a single source of the truth for supplier profiles, intake processes, contracting and onboarding workflows, give you robust scoring and categorization of vendors based on data-driven insights, not manual processes, give you the capability to assess vendors across different types of risk domains, because not every risk is a security risk. Validate results with continuous monitoring of multiple different insights. And what we've done there is we've done the work of integrating those different risk monitoring inputs and intelligence sources together into one pane of glass, so that you're not looking at D&B for this, or Refinitiv for this, or Ecobotus for this, or whatever for that. You're looking at one pane of glass that displays the risk scoring, and gives you the ability to take action on those risks from there. Measure KPIs, KRIs, SLAs, and then give you a prescriptive offboarding checklist that enables you to verify that your former vendor, or soon to be former vendor, is adhering to all the contract terms, data destruction models, and more that you need them to in order to successfully offboard them from the business. At the end of the day, three things is what this process, this very prescriptive third-party risk management process, delivers for you. Number one is a simplified and a much faster onboarding process with a single source of the truth, a streamlined risk assessment process and fewer gaps in risk coverage, and then a strong harmony between teams in the enterprise across the lifecycle, because you're all looking from the same set of data and processes and more. How we accomplish this is we deliver a solution that includes a combination of experts in the industry, delivered via managed services, if that's your choice, the greatest number and depth of sources available, resources for data and intelligence in the platform, and then that platform that helps you layer on automation, workflow, and more to assess and monitor your vendors across the life cycle. And we do that across many different domain areas. What I've done is just bucket these into 6 broad categories: security, operational, financial, ESG, reputational, and compliance risks. Again, this type of risk management is enabled, third-party risk management is enabled on our platform through a combination of very prescriptive assessments. We've got more than 200 in the platform, 200 templates, and validated by continuous monitoring sources across each of these domain areas. Look, at the end of the day, 3 things we want for you. Number 1 is to help your organization be smarter, give you the intelligence you need, the data-driven analytics, the role-based reporting to give you the ability to get to the data and report as necessary, up the channel to your team. Second is to unify the tools and the processes and the teams that are currently managing third-party risk and get you to a single source of the truth. And third, to be very prescriptive about how you do this with the intelligence, the built-in remediation recommendations, and the workflow to help you expand and be agile, in your enterprise over time. That's our approach to third-party risk. What we're trying to help you, solve from an automation and a platform and a solutions perspective. I hope that's clear. And at this point, I'll kind of pitch back over to Ashley. Ashley, we'll open up the questions and we can go from there.
Thanks, Scott. I'm going to go ahead and launch our second poll so we can follow up with you regarding any third-party risk management initiatives or projects that you may have. We'd like to see if you're looking to establish or augment a third-party risk program within a year. And please be honest, because we do follow up with you, but we have about 15 minutes left on the clock. So Tom, Scott, let's get this party started and go through some of these questions. All right, first up, we have a question for Tom. James asked, where does best practice indicate the better place to operate a TPRM program? Does TPRM belong in cyber, sourcing and procurement, risk management, or does it align better as a standalone control group?
I am starting with, how about this? It's really, I have been seeing it based on location. So let me explain. Here in the US, third-party risk management programs still tend to reside in the information technology space. In other words, some way, shape, or form reporting up to the CIO. That includes the CISO. I'm still seeing a lot of third-party risk management programs with their feet firmly grounded as part of information security. However, as I travel across the pond, and I spent quite a few years over with people in London, with people in Europe, seeing a lot more of that being switched over between the risk organization, particularly if you're in financial services, or over into sourcing and procurement. Sourcing and procurement is doing a lot of that. So in order to be able to bring on vendors that have more of a secure, or I should say more of a mature security and privacy posture. That's what they're looking for. So sourcing and procurement is really good at doing that too, because there's a lot of pressure, particularly in regulated industries, in Europe in particular, to have what's called a vendor registry or a vendor inventory. Here in the US, a lot of organizations are still struggling with their true vendor inventory. So you're starting to see some of these shifts moving into procurement and sourcing groups to be able to get their arms more soundly around the third-party risk space. So I'm starting to see that shift here in the US. As a matter of fact, I do know a couple of financial service firms that have actually moved the third-party risk management programs from cyber into procurement and sourcing too. And another reason for that is not just for the security and the privacy aspects of it, but because now the risk lens has broadened. As I mentioned earlier, you're looking at things from an ESG perspective, you're looking at things from a geopolitical perspective, geolocational perspective, on and on. These risks, these focus points don't exist in information security, and they don't want anything to do with them. So to help break down all of these dotted lines to all these ancillary organizations, it's better to find a place where it truly can sit in. But there are third-party risk management programs, and I'm doing a wet finger in the wind here. It's still here, at least in the US, around 70 to 80% of them are still housed in information security because there's a laser focus from a security perspective. And really the reason for that is because of all the cyber threats you're seeing. Okay. Again, in Europe, they have the focus on cybersecurity. However, they're moving those into the risk organizations or even over into procurement and sourcing.
Thanks, Tom. And then one question for you, Scott. Maria asks, are there assessments in the platform using questionnaires based on standards?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have, like I said, we got 200 or something assessments in the platform. There are some that are regulatory specific. For example, we have like an NYDFS assessment. We've got like a HIPAA assessment, but then we have some that are structured based on like NIST 800-53, ISO 27001, and a couple of others as well. So we've got them based on industry framework as well as specific compliance regulation. And we've got some that are just, fairly loosely defined that allows you to be flexible with whatever kind of risk topic you need to address. Hope that answered your question.
Thanks, Scott. And then Tom, somebody asked, how do you address not having an audit department?
There's a lot of smaller and mid-sized organizations that either don't have an audit department, or usually if they have an audit department, I have a couple of clients like this already, it's more from an operational perspective. And in many cases, they're providing more of an actual compliance function than say the audit function. Because remember, compliance is setting the guardrails, audit's making sure you're following those guidelines. And any outside variances, they bring that to you as findings and observations. The other thing with the audit departments is, don't forget, by charter, audit reports directly to the board. They don't report to anybody else within the organization. So when you're assessing a smaller mid-sized vendor, you should be asking them, this should be part of your question set of, how do you do audits? Does anybody outside your organization do audits? If you don't have an internal audit department, that's okay. However, somebody outside the organization should be looking at that, okay? And you can't just sit there and say, well, we got a SOC 2 with it. It's not going to cut it. You want somebody to be able to look and understand from an infrastructure perspective, from a process perspective, from a data perspective, based on the processing that they're doing holistically across the enterprise, and make sure they have sound control. So, again, your big dog organizations, mid-sized organizations will have audit departments, but it really depends on the amount of people it is. And it also, and in this day and age too, talent, there's a lot of newbies out there doing IT audit. And so it's always good to ask those questions. And if you can, ask and see if somebody has performed an audit. However, they won't always turn that over, because internal audit reports are usually strategically and structured inside the organization, and those reports will stay as such. So it's kind of like, no, we can't share those reports with you, but you get 100% of what you don't ask for.
Thanks, Tom. And then Scott, another question for you. Maria asked, does the prevalent platform include an audit and policy management module?
Yeah, great question. The short answer to your question is yes. The longer answer is it's not a separate module. It's capabilities that are built in natively in the platform. It allows you to execute audits, produce regulatory specific reporting that's tied to the controls that you have to report against for a particular reg or framework or whatever, and then allows you to kind of consume policies in there as well and set standards against those policies. So short answer, yes. Longer answer, a little bit more context.
Thanks, Scott. And then Tom, another question for you. James asked, can you speak to developing risk tolerances? In other words, when you say no to a vendor, i.e. because of bad financial scores, concentration risk, past breaches, or poor patching?
If you find things with respect to the vendor, a lot of times third-party risk professionals tend to reach out to the vendor first. I would actually share this information first with the business unit and say, this is what we found. Don't forget, they own the relationship. They're the ones writing the checks to the vendor. As a business owner, I would want to know if you found something from the vendor before you go to them, because that also arms me, particularly if I know I got a contract coming up a month or 2 months from now for renewal. That could actually arm me with information that I could take with me and say, you know what, we just ran some reports on you. We have some tools and we analyzed a couple of things. My risk tolerance for you has increased, and I'm not really happy about that. So what additional things can I get in a contract to provide me assurances over the security and private handling of my data? Okay, so that helps the business unit to win those assurances, and it also helps to arm them with things that they may even be able to get additional costs down by saying, hey, look, you're putting me at risk. I want a little bit of something back here, because now I may have to, as a business process, invest more with security and other organizations in tools to continue that monitoring. So I think it's best to start off with the business unit And of course, you want to go back out and talk to the vendor about this. You want to certainly make sure too that the tools that you're using, that you're not finding any false positives. That's a whole different conversation for another topic in the future. But it's good to be continuing about that and sharing that information with the vendor. But do yourself a favor, share the information with your business process first, but be prepared to explain also, what does this mean to me? You don't want to go in there saying the sky is falling, we found all this stuff. You're going to have to do your homework before you pose anything to the business. Okay, I think that's something that's going to save you a lot of headache.
Thanks, Tom. And then another question for you. Justin asks, what is the importance of having a tool such as Prevalent or other continuous monitoring solutions to a program, and will it aid in maturity?
It certainly aids in maturity. It's one of the questions and one of the sections that's actually in the vendor risk management maturity model, number one. Number two, if you're in a regulated environment, I do know banks, big banks, where they came in and showed them their vendor risk maturity. We sat back and we've done a maturity assessment on ourselves, and it gave comfort to the regulator in saying, okay, you're staying on top of this. We see where the linkages are. We see how you're working. We see how you're doing assessments. It helps to bring not just credence, but it helps to bring even stability to your third-party risk management program. And it can also help feed additional respect from the regulator into the process that you're doing and into the organization in getting a handle over those third risk practices. And I think there was, Ashley, you mentioned it was part of that was a question on tools, if I can recall.
Yes. Let me find it really quick. Sorry about that.
Yeah, sorry. I just want to make sure I'm able to hone in on it.
No, it's all good. Justin asked, what's the importance of having a tool or other tools such as Prevalent to monitor a program, and does it aid in maturity?
I'll tell you right now, it helps certainly on the administrative side of the house. And I'm still shocked in this day and age that a lot of third-party risk management organizations don't have service level agreements with the business units. You know, why is this taking 60 days? Why is this taking 70 days? Should it take 30 days? So if you're going to develop a service level agreement and say this should take between 20 and 30 days based on the tools we have, based on the risk presented to itself, that helps you. Tools like Prevalent, continuous monitoring tools, any type of assessment tools, anything you might be using in your toolbox will help you achieve those service level agreements. I can tell you right now, based on the maturity, as your program matures, every month I had to send metrics up to my management. We know the adage. You can't manage what you don't monitor. So you have to be able to rely on metrics and be able to say, hey, if our service level agreement with our business unit is 30 days, are we coming in at 30? Are we coming in at 28? Did we come in at 32? What made us come in at 32? 32 days instead. So helps allow you to shape your story as to what that was. Do we need more resources? Was there vacation time? Were there a couple of net new vendors that we just got hit with and everybody wanted these projects to get kicked off? So it really helps to build your case. Anytime you have a tool to assist you is really going to be a bonus to have. You don't need a power drill to put a birdhouse together. But if you're going to put on an addition onto your house, you're probably going to want some power tools. So know what you're getting yourself into, know what you need to support your program.
Thanks, Tom. And then Scott, I have two more questions. I know we're almost at the top of the hour, but somebody asked, how does Prevalent distinguish itself from other competitors? And Ria asked, can Prevalent be adjusted to the processes of a subject matter expert type of company?
Yeah, the second one first. Yeah, I mean, Prevalent is deployed in companies of all sizes, from very small companies to very large companies. So we can manage third-party risk for you from a small and medium enterprise perspective, all the way up to an enterprise perspective. So no problem there. The first question you asked about what differentiates Prevalent, I would probably say three things. Number one is the depth of our expertise in managed services, the fact that we can do a lot of that work for you on your behalf, from onboarding vendors to executing assessments to doing the analysis to recommending remediations all throughout the vendor lifecycle. Second one is the fact that we address risk at every stage of the life cycle with capabilities that are built into the platform. So you don't have to keep licensing a bunch of different tools from different vendors to get it all done. And then third, that we're the only vendor that fully integrates natively continuous monitoring of cyber, business, financial, and reputational insights to correlate against assessment results in the platform that allow you to be much more smart and prescriptive about your risk response and actions from there.
Thanks, Scott. And then one more question for you, Tom. You mentioned the use of automated tools. What do you think about DNB and the reliability of information that they put out?
I don't like to bring up necessarily talking about vendors and tools. How about if I throw this at you? If you would like to have a deeper conversation on that, reach out to me directly. You know what? Remember, tools are out there to assist you. There's some pros and cons with every single tool that's out there. And it's finding the tool that's right for you. DNB, you know, obviously is you're monitoring things from a financial or inside trading. I shouldn't say inside selling of executives and things like that. Sometimes you might want to use smaller ancillary tools instead of a big platform like that or whatnot. But if you want to reach out to me directly, we could probably have a more in-depth discussion. That's something that, because there's a lot of tools to monitor things from a financial perspective.
Thank you, Tom, and everyone for all of your questions. Tom and Scott gave us some great information to take in today. So I hope to see all of you either in your inboxes or at a future Prevalent webinar. Cheers, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday.
Cheers, everyone. Thank you. Stay well.